You open your eyes, and the first thing you hear is the howl of the wind tearing across the endless steppe. No trees, no cozy Starbucks around the corner. Just flat, cold grassland stretching so far, you start questioning whether the earth is actually flat after all. The air? Thin, sharp, and dry. It smells of horse sweat, smoke, and meat that's, let's say, questionably aged. Welcome to the Mongol Empire. And before you roll your eyes and think, oh yeah, Genghis Khan, horseback warriors, big empire, got it, stop right there. Because what you don't know is that this wasn't just the largest land empire in history. It was a world-bending revolution. An empire that erased entire cities, rewrote trade, and somehow made paper money cool centuries before Bitcoin bros ever did. Now, quick question. Could you survive even one day in this world? Let's see. First challenge, breakfast. Forget cereal. Forget pancakes. You're sipping on fermented mare's milk. Yes, horse milk gone slightly alcoholic. It's tangy, sour, and it punches you in the gut like a shot of tequila that hates you. Still thirsty? Well, good news. You've got animal blood on the menu, straight from the vein. Hey, don't look at me. It's a survival trick, and Mongol warriors swore by it. But here's the twist. This isn't just some wild nomadic frat party. The Mongols weren't chaos for chaos's sake. They built postal systems that could out-Amazon Amazon. They connected cultures that had never even dreamed of each other. They made medieval globalization a thing, whether you liked it or not. And yet, how much of that do we actually talk about today? Not much. Instead, history textbooks tend to flatten the Mongols into one note. Horsemen with sharp swords. Brutal conquerors. End of story. But the forgotten history? That's where it gets spicy. Because this empire didn't just conquer, it stitched the medieval world together, and in a weird way, you're still feeling its aftershocks every time you order noodles, swipe on your phone, or even complain about traffic on roads they helped influence. So grab your cloak, no seriously, it's freezing out here, and saddle up. Because we're about to ride through the hidden chapters of the Mongol Empire. All right, so, you've survived your first sip of fermented horse milk. Congrats. Most modern stomachs would have tapped out by now. But don't get comfortable because life on the steppe doesn't wait for anyone, least of all you. You step outside your felt-covered yurt. The wind nearly smacks you off your feet, and your nose instantly freezes. The horizon looks endless, grass, sky, and more grass. You start to wonder, where's the nearest city? Where's a river? Where's anything? The answer? Days away. And that's exactly why the Mongols thrived here. If you can't handle this emptiness, you don't belong. Their secret weapon wasn't just their horses. It was adaptation. Imagine growing up in a world where riding before you could walk was totally normal. By the time a Mongol kid was your age, they could fire arrows backwards at full gallop without even spilling their dinner. Meanwhile, some of us still struggle to parallel park. And let's be honest, this wasn't a lifestyle for the faint of heart. No cozy castles, no golden palaces, just constant movement. If the pasture dried up, pack your bags, fold up the yurt, and move. If the weather turned brutal, too bad. You push through. It was survival of the most stubborn. But here's the kicker, that toughness, that mobility, that relentless grit. It's what made the Mongols terrifying to their enemies. While kings in Europe were busy arguing over crowns and trying to squeeze into armor that looked like medieval cosplay, the Mongols were training entire armies to be a moving storm, fast, efficient, and unpredictable. Now you might be thinking, okay, so they were tough nomads with horses. Cool. But how does that become the biggest empire in history? Glad you asked. Because next up, enter the man, the myth, the DNA distributing legend, Temujin. You know him better as Genghis Khan. But before he was Khan of Khans, he was just a kid on the steppe, abandoned, betrayed, and basically the underdog nobody saw coming. And if you think your family drama is messy, just wait until you hear his. So, Temujin. Picture a scrawny kid on the steppe. not exactly the poster child for future emperor. His father, poisoned, his family, abandoned by their tribe and left to starve. His childhood, basically one long survivor episode, minus the cameras and immunity challenges. He hunted fish out of frozen rivers, fought with his half-brother over food, and lived in constant fear of rival clans wiping them out. Imagine being 12 years old and already thinking, how do I keep my entire family alive until next week? Meanwhile, at 12, I was stressing about middle school math homework. But here's the thing about rock bottom. It breeds resilience. Temujin didn't just learn how to survive, he learned how to lead. Slowly, he gathered allies, swore blood brotherhoods, and turned betrayals into fuel. The dude practically had betrayal punch cards. Get stabbed in the back 9 times, the 10th one's free. And then, when the moment was right, he did what nobody thought possible. He united the Mongol tribes. Think about that. These clans hated each other. It was like getting every rival sports team to share one locker room, minus the deodorant. Yet Temujin convinced them that together they could rule more than just the steppe. In 1206, they crowned him Genghis Khan, which roughly translates to universal ruler. Humble title, right? Now, here's where the forgotten history starts to really kick in. Because Genghis wasn't just a warlord. He was a system builder. He reorganized armies into units based on merit, not family ties. He created a legal code, the Yasa, that covered everything from theft to military discipline. He even cracked down on aristocratic snobbery. Imagine a medieval CEO saying, "Sorry, buddy, I don't care who your dad is. Can you ride a horse and shoot straight? No? Then step aside." That's why his armies weren't just scary. They were efficient, disciplined, and loyal, which, by the way, spelled absolute doom for anyone standing in their way. And stand in their way. Oh, people did. Now that you've met the Khan, let's talk about what happened when his storm started rolling west. Spoiler alert, medieval Europe was not ready. Okay, buckle up. Because once Genghis had his house in order, he didn't just sit around on the steppe sipping horse milk cocktails. Nope. He unleashed the Mongol war machine on the world. And let me tell you, when the Mongols showed up at your city walls, it was game over. Imagine thousands of horsemen thundering across the horizon, dust clouds choking the sky, war drums echoing like the world's worst alarm clock. You're standing on the ramparts thinking, maybe if we just don't answer the door, they'll go away. Spoiler, they won't. These guys were masters of psychological warfare. Whole towns would surrender without a fight just because they'd heard what happened to their neighbors. Genghis was basically running the original fear marketing campaign. Brutal? Absolutely. Effective? Oh yeah. Now let us not sugarcoat it. The Mongols did things that make Game of Thrones look like Saturday morning cartoons. Mass executions, pyramids of skulls, scorched earth, you name it. Cities that resisted were sometimes wiped so clean, it's like they were deleted from the map. Control plus Alt plus Delete Medieval Edition. But here is the twist most people forget. The Mongols weren't destroying for the sake of chaos. They had a plan. Behind the smoke and rubble, Genghis was building an empire that functioned like clockwork. He opened the Silk Road, creating safer trade routes than Europe had seen in centuries. He set up relay stations with fresh horses, basically the Amazon Prime of the 13th century. If you wanted news, goods, or even a diplomat delivered, Mongol couriers could get it across Asia faster than you can ship a package today. And religious tolerance? Believe it or not, Genghis didn't care if you prayed to Jesus, Allah, Buddha, or a golden yak statue, as long as you paid your taxes and didn't rebel. Imagine that. In a world of crusades and inquisitions, the Mongols were like, worship whoever, just don't annoy us. So yes, they burned cities. But they also stitched entire continents together. Death and destruction rode side by side with trade and cultural exchange. That's the forgotten paradox of the Mongol Empire, apocalypse with a side of globalization. Now that you've survived the first wave of conquest, let's travel further west, because when the Mongols came knocking on Europe's door, the results were messy. So picture this. It's the early 1200s. Europe is busy doing its thing. Knights jousting, kings squabbling over crowns, peasants wondering if bread will ever taste like something other than sadness. Life is grim but predictable. And then, boom, a ripple on the horizon. Reports of a terrifying army moving faster than anyone thought possible. Warriors who lived in the saddle, shot arrows that could punch through armor, and had no problem tearing entire kingdoms apart. The Mongols had arrived. First stop? Eastern Europe, Poland, Hungary, places that weren't exactly expecting surprise visitors from Asia. At the Battle of Legnica in 1241, European knights charged in, heavy armor gleaming, confident they'd crush these barbarians. Spoiler alert, it went about as well as you trying to race a Tesla in a shopping cart. The Mongols feigned retreats, lured them into traps, and then unleashed arrow storms so thick it probably felt like the sky was falling. Hungary? Same story. Mongols swept through, left smoking ruins behind, and made every surviving king think, uh-oh, we might actually be next. Medieval Europe suddenly had nightmares about horsemen from the east, horsemen who did not play by the same rules. But here's the crazy part. Just as Europe was bracing for the full apocalypse, the Mongols turned around, packed up, went home. Why? Because back in Mongolia, the great Khan had died. And when a Khan dies, every Mongol commander, no matter how far away, has to return for the election of a new one. Imagine if your boss called a Zoom meeting so important that you had to abandon world conquest just to attend. And just like that, Europe was spared. Vienna, Paris, even Rome. They got lucky. History could have gone very differently. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because after all this terror, after all this blood and fire, the Mongols didn't just vanish. No, they left behind threads that connected Europe and Asia like never before. Silk, spices, paper, gunpowder, all flowing west. Ideas moving faster than gossip at a family reunion. Even the Black Death hitched a ride along these new trade routes. Yeah. Thanks, Mongols. So while Europe remembered the terror, it quietly reaped the benefits too. And that's the part of the story most textbooks shove into the footnotes. But hold on. We've only talked conquest so far. Next, let's peel back the smoke and ashes and look at the Mongols' forgotten innovations. Because believe it or not, some of the comforts of your modern life owe a debt to those horse-riding conquerors of the steppe. Let's take a breather. You've survived the battles, the burning cities, and the skull pyramids. Congrats! You're still alive. But now comes the weird part. You might actually like some of what the Mongols built. You're standing at a dusty roadside station. A courier gallops in, leaps off his horse, and without even breaking stride, swaps onto a fresh one and takes off again. Yet somehow your message is flying across the empire faster than anything in the medieval world. It's basically the 13th century FedEx, only with fewer shipping fees and slightly more horse poop. Oh, and passports? Thank the Mongols. They had a little tablet called a paisa, a stamped piece of authority that said, "This person's cool, let them pass." Without it, you were just another traveler at the mercy of suspicious guards. With it, you could move through one of the largest empires on Earth like you were holding a VIP backstage pass. And let's talk tolerance. In a world where Europeans were launching crusades and burning heretics like marshmallows, the Mongols were shockingly chill about religion. Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, shaman, whatever. As long as you weren't plotting rebellion, Genghis didn't care. Imagine a medieval Tinder profile that just said, "Swipe right if you pay your taxes." Then there's trade, spices, silk, glassware, even ideas zipped across Eurasia like never before. The Mongols didn't just allow trade, they protected it. A merchant caravan under their watch was safer than some modern packages are under Amazon. And here's a fun fact. Without Mongol networks, pasta might never have made it to Italy. That's right. Your spaghetti dinner owes a tiny nod to Genghis Khan. But not all innovations were pleasant. Remember the Black Death? Yep, that little pandemic piggybacked along those same trade routes the Mongols opened up. In the 1340s, it rolled west and wiped out a third of Europe. So, globalization cuts both ways, huh? Still, here's the big point. The Mongols weren't just wrecking balls. They were bridge builders. Unintentional, brutal, often terrifying bridge builders, but bridge builders nonetheless. And that's why their story is more complicated, more forgotten, than just horsemen who destroyed stuff. Now that you've seen both sides, the destruction and the connections, it is time for the big question. What happened when the storm finally faded? Every storm eventually runs out of rain. And for the Mongol Empire, that storm began breaking apart almost as quickly as it had formed. After Genghis Khan's death, his descendants inherited the empire like kids fighting over a massive family estate. Only instead of arguing about who gets grandma's teapot, they argued over who gets Russia, who gets Persia, and who gets China. Spoiler, the empire split into chunks, called khanates, each ruled by a different branch of the family tree. Think of it as a medieval group project where everyone refused to work together. The Golden Horde ruled the steppes of Russia and Eastern Europe, squeezing tribute out of Moscow like it was their personal piggy bank. Over in the Middle East, the Ilkhanate tangled with Persians and Turks. Meanwhile, in China, the Yuan dynasty took over, with Kublai Khan, yes, the guy Marco Polo couldn't stop name-dropping, sitting on the dragon throne in Beijing. But here's the thing about vast empires. They're like IKEA furniture. Looks great when it's all put together, but one missing screw and the whole thing wobbles. Internal rivalries, plagues, rebellions, one by one the khanates crumbled. By the 14th century, the unstoppable Mongol machine had sputtered out, and yet, it never truly disappeared. Russia's identity? Shaped by 2 centuries under the Mongols. China's borders? Redrawn by the Yuan dynasty. The Islamic world? Forever altered by the Mongol storms that swept through. Even Europe? They got gunpowder, trade links, and a very rude awakening that their knights in shining armor weren't invincible. So while the Mongol Empire fractured, its fingerprints are still all over our modern world. You just have to know where to look. All right, you've survived the conquests, dodged the skull pyramids, and somehow made friends with a horse. Now let's slow down and live a single day under Mongol rule. Spoiler, it's not all doom and gloom. You wake up inside a yurt. The air smells like smoke, wool, and milk that's been sitting out for, well, too long. Outside, horses snort in the cold morning air tied to posts. Kids are already riding bareback like it's second nature while their parents are packing up, because yurts were portable homes. Imagine if you could fold up your house like a camping tent, strap it to a cart, and move it wherever you wanted. Zillow would have nothing on this. Breakfast? Same deal as before. Fermented mare's milk and maybe some dried mutton. Not exactly 5-star dining, but it'll keep you alive while you ride 50 miles today. Because in the Mongol Empire, travel wasn't just for merchants or soldiers. Ordinary people moved constantly, following grazing land, trading with neighbors, or being relocated by order of the Khan. You were part of a living, breathing machine. Now let's say you're a merchant hauling silk from China to Persia. For the first time in history, you can cross thousands of miles under one empire's protection. Roads are patrolled. Relay stations offer fresh horses. Bandits? They don't dare, because Mongol justice is brutal and swift. Suddenly, you realize you were safer on a Mongol trade route than on some medieval European highway 5 miles from your house. And it's not just goods moving, it's ideas. In bustling Mongol cities, you might overhear a Muslim scholar debating a Buddhist monk while a Nestorian Christian priest takes notes. It's like a medieval Reddit thread, except with more incense and less trolling. But don't get too comfy. Mongol life wasn't paradise. Tax collectors could show up at any moment, and believe me, you didn't want to get on their bad side. Also, your city could be thriving one year and then ordered to relocate the next. The Mongols ran things with efficiency, but also with unpredictability. Still, here's the kicker. For ordinary people, Mongol rule was sometimes better than what came before. Roads were safer, trade boomed, and if you were a craftsman, your skills could suddenly be in demand across continents. One day you're making pottery in Samarkand, the next you're shipped off to China to decorate palaces. Upside? Global career opportunities. Downside? You don't get to say no. So daily life under the Mongols was this strange paradox. Harsh, mobile, unstable, but also strangely modern. And in a world that had been fractured for centuries, it felt like for a brief moment, you were part of something truly global. Let's be real. Without horses, the Mongol Empire would have just been a bunch of very cold people in big coats. Horses weren't just animals here. They were life itself. Imagine this. You wake up, step outside your yurt, and there are more horses than people. A Mongol warrior didn't own one horse, he owned a whole herd. Why? Because when one got tired, he just swapped to the next. It was like having 5 cars all fueled up parked in your driveway, except they were furry, occasionally bitey, and smelled like hay. And these weren't just any horses. Mongol ponies were small, tough, and ridiculously resilient. They could survive on scrubby grass that would make a cow weep. They could gallop for days across terrain that would snap the ankles of European war horses. If medieval knights were rolling around in armored tanks, the Mongols were zipping past in dirt bikes. But here's the wildest part. Mongols didn't just ride their horses. They lived on them. They drank their milk. They ate their meat. They used their hides for clothes, their bones for tools. In desperate times, a warrior would nick a vein and drink the horse's blood without killing it. That's next-level Uber Eats. Now picture battle. You're a soldier in some European army wearing heavy armor, clanking around like a medieval tin can. Across the field, Mongol riders move like shadows, circling, feinting, unleashing arrow storms while you're still trying to catch your breath. They communicate with whistles, flags, and horns, shifting formations with military precision. It's like fighting a swarm of hornets, fast, coordinated, and absolutely terrifying. And the craziest thing? Mongol horses were so well trained that warriors could fire arrows while standing on the saddle, or even flip sideways to use the horse's body as a shield. Try doing that with your family's pet pony. So when people say, the Mongols conquered half the world, remember, it wasn't just Genghis Khan's brains or his army's discipline. It was 4 hooves pounding across the earth, carrying riders who treated the saddle like a second home. In short, horses weren't the background of the Mongol story. They were the engine, the heartbeat, the secret weapon that made the largest land empire in history even possible. All right. So you've survived the steppe, the horses, and even a questionable breakfast of fermented milk. But now imagine this. You've just been caught stealing a sheep. Uh-oh. What happens next? Welcome to the Yasa, the secretive legal code of the Mongol Empire. Nobody outside the elite really got to read it, but everybody felt it, and trust me, you did not want to break it. Justice under the Mongols was swift, harsh, and often creative. Steal something? Depending on the crime, you could be fined, enslaved, or executed on the spot. Lie or cheat? The punishment could be death. Try running away from the army? Guess what? You're also dead. Basically, the Yasa had one guiding principle: don't mess with the system. But here's the twist. Mongol justice wasn't all about cruelty. It was also about fairness, at least by medieval standards. Genghis Khan was obsessed with loyalty and order, so he actually banned aristocrats from pulling rank just because of their noble birth. Imagine a medieval world where even the king's spoiled nephew couldn't have cut the line at Starbucks. Radical, right? And believe it or not, the Yasa covered everyday etiquette too. For example, don't step on the threshold of a yurt. Bad manners, possible punishment. Always share food with guests or risk serious trouble. And if you disrespected fire or water, 2 sacred elements, you'd be punished. Basically, the Mongols turned good manners into federal law. Now, executions were, Well, let's just say they were creative. One infamous method was rolling you up in a carpet and trampling you with horses. Why a carpet? Because blood couldn't be spilled on the earth. It was taboo, brutal, and eco-conscious. But here's the kicker. As terrifying as Mongol law was, it worked. Merchants could travel safely across thousands of miles. People from different religions lived side by side. Soldiers knew exactly what would happen if they disobeyed orders. And compared to the chaotic feudal courts of Europe, Mongol justice was weirdly reliable. So yeah, living under Mongol law was like living under the world's strictest HOA. Only instead of fines for your messy lawn, you risked execution for being rude to your neighbor. You've spent all day riding across windswept plains, arrows in your quiver, dust in your lungs. The sun sets, and finally, you arrive at camp. Tonight isn't about war, tonight is about feasting. And Mongol feasts? Oh, they were legendary. Picture a massive gathering under the open sky. Fires crackle, the smell of roasted mutton drifts through the air, and someone stirring a giant pot of soup so greasy it could probably fuel a car engine. Plates, forks, forget it. You eat with your hands, tear at the meat, and wash it down with endless bowls of kumis, the fermented mare ass milk that half drink, half dare. One sip and you're buzzing. 3 sips and suddenly you think you can sing. And speaking of singing, the Mongols loved it. Deep, throaty songs that echoed across the plains, sometimes accompanied by instruments made from horsehair. Add dancing, storytelling, and the occasional wrestling match, and you've got yourself a nomadic rave. But here's the best part: the humor. Believe it or not, Mongols were jokesters. They teased each other mercilessly, poked fun at rivals, and laughed at dirty jokes around the fire. Imagine warriors who could spend the day burning a city to the ground and then end the night joking about whose horse smelled the worst. Dark humor, yes, but humor all the same. And these feasts weren't just for fun. They were political theaters. Alliances were forged over roasted meat. Rivalries cooled or flared over strong drink. If Genghis Khan raised a cup and toasted you, congratulations, you were in. If he ignored you, well, better start worrying. There's even a story of one feast where Genghis invited rival leaders, got them drunk, and then, let's just say the night didn't end well for his guests. Mongol banquets were equal parts hospitality and high-stakes poker. So, while the world remembers them for war and bloodshed, don't forget, the Mongols also knew how to throw a party, a brutal, boozy, unforgettable party where history was made between bites of mutton and gulps of horse milk. All right, here is a question. How do you control an empire that stretches from the Pacific Ocean to the edge of Europe without Zoom, Google Maps, or even a reliable postal service? Simple. You build the ultimate spy and messenger network. The Mongols didn't just rely on brute force, they ran on information. Before attacking a city, they sent scouts, sometimes disguised as merchants, monks, or wandering travelers. These guys slipped inside, counted defenders, mapped the walls, listened to gossip in the markets, and then slipped back out like ghosts. By the time the army arrived, Genghis already knew how many guards you had, where your weakest gate was, and whether your general secretly preferred wine over beer. And then there was the yam system, the horse relay I mentioned earlier. Picture it, thousands of miles of outposts, each stocked with fresh horses and supplies. A rider would gallop in, hand off a message, grab another horse, and vanish into the horizon. The Mongols could move information faster than anyone else in the medieval world. It was so efficient that a message could travel from China to Persia in just a few weeks. Compare that to medieval Europe, where your letter might get lost because the messenger decided to spend 3 months drinking in a tavern. And here's the sneaky part. The system doubled as surveillance. Every outpost kept eyes on travelers, collecting news, rumors, and intel. It wasn't just a postal service, it was the empire's nervous system, a living web of spies and informants. Want a fun detail? Some reports say Mongol messengers carried sealed metal capsules like medieval USB sticks to keep secret orders safe. If they were captured, the capsule was practically indestructible. CIA, eat your heart out. This is why the Mongols always seemed 10 steps ahead. While their enemies stumbled around with outdated news, Genghis and his generals already knew where to strike, when to retreat, and how to make their enemies look like amateurs. So yes, they had horses, they had bows, they had fear, but they also had data. And in any century, knowledge is power. Okay, let's play a quick game. Imagine you're in 13th century Venice, sipping wine and trying not to die of plague. Suddenly, a merchant bursts into town with silk from China, spices from India, and rumors of a place where you can buy gunpowder that actually explodes instead of just fizzling. Who made that possible? Yep, the Mongols. One of the forgotten parts of their story is that they basically rebooted the Silk Road. Before the Mongols, that network of trade routes was more like a sketchy alleyway. Bandits everywhere, corrupt toll collectors, and if you were lucky, you only got robbed once on the way. But under the Mongol Empire, the Silk Road became the closest thing the medieval world had to Amazon Prime. They guaranteed protection for caravans, cut down on middlemen, and made sure that merchants could cross entire continents with far less fear. Marco Polo didn't just wander into Asia by accident. He followed a system the Mongols had stabilized. And this wasn't just about luxury goods. Think big. Paper money spread, gunpowder traveled west, Persian glassware reached China. Even ideas, astronomy, medicine, maps, flowed like never before. Suddenly, Europe, the Middle East, and Asia weren't isolated bubbles. They were plugged into the same circuit. And food? Oh, the food. Without the Mongol trade routes, you don't get pasta in Italy, because the idea of noodles doesn't make the jump from China. No noodles, no spaghetti, no pizza. And honestly, without pizza, would civilization even be worth it? Here's the irony, though. The same routes that carried silk and spices also carried something much darker. The Black Death. Yep. The plague hitched a ride on Mongol trade networks and wiped out a third of Europe. Imagine ordering a package and instead of cool merch, you get a deadly disease. Thanks, globalization. So next time you scroll Amazon or order Uber Eats, remember, you're basically living in a world the Mongols helped create. Trade on a massive scale, connections across continents, and the terrifying reality that your package might contain something you didn't order. So, you've built the largest land empire in history. Congratulations. But here's the problem. What happens when the genius who held it all together, Genghis, dies? Answer: chaos. After his death, the empire split into chunks, like a giant pizza nobody could agree on how to share. You had the Golden Horde up in Russia, the Yuan dynasty in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia. All cousins, all claiming we're the real Mongol heirs, and all secretly plotting to stab each other in the back. The Golden Horde. They became the nightmare of medieval Russia, forcing princes to pay tribute and bow low enough to kiss the ground. But they also ended up adopting a lot of Russian and Islamic culture, kind of like when your edgy friend who swore they'd never change suddenly gets really into yoga and essential oils. Meanwhile, in Persia, the Ilkhanate tried their best to rule, but let's just say they weren't exactly model administrators. Some rulers converted to Islam, some didn't, and some couldn't decide at breakfast what religion they even were. Spoiler, this did not help political stability. And then there's China, where Kublai Khan, yes, the grandson of Genghis, declared himself emperor and started the Yuan dynasty. On paper, it sounded amazing. Mongols ruling the Middle Kingdom, silk flowing, palaces gleaming. In reality, Chinese peasants were like, who are these foreigners making dumb tax laws? Eventually, rebellions piled up, and the Yuan dynasty crumbled like stale bread. But here's the twist. Even though the empire broke apart, the Mongol legacy stuck. They left behind trade routes, administrative systems, and even new cultural mashups. In some regions, Mongols went from feared conquerors to that family who runs the local bakery now. And yes, the Black Death spreading along their trade networks didn't yet help the whole good reputation thing. Imagine being remembered both as the guys who gave Europe spaghetti and the bubonic plague. Bit of a mixed review, right? So the Mongol Empire didn't vanish in an explosion of glory. It just fizzled, splintered, and melted into the cultures it once conquered, which in its own way might be even more fascinating than the rise. So here's the thing about the Mongols. Even after their empire splintered, the world couldn't stop talking about them. It was like that one celebrity who hasn't made a movie in decades, but somehow still trends on Twitter. In Europe, for example, rumors spread that the Mongols weren't just horsemen from the east. They were some kind of biblical punishment. Chroniclers whispered that Genghis Khan might be the descendant of Gog and Magog, those apocalyptic horsemen meant to bring the end times. Talk about a PR nightmare. Meanwhile, in Asia, stories of Genghis grew taller with every retelling. Some swore he was divinely chosen. Others claimed he was born with a clot of blood in his hand, a sure medieval sign you're destined for greatness, or, vampirism. And in Persia, poets couldn't decide whether to paint the Mongols as monsters or mysterious instruments of fate. Oh, and let's not forget the where is he buried? Mystery. Supposedly, Genghis' burial site is so secret that the soldiers who carried his body killed everyone they passed along the way, and then killed themselves. Is it true? Who knows? But admit it, you kind of want to believe his grave is still hidden under some windswept Mongolian hill, guarded by ghosts on horseback. Even Marco Polo got in on the Mongol mystique. He told tales of Kublai Khan's court with palaces so dazzling they sounded like early drafts of a Disney movie. Historians today debate how much of that was fact and how much was Polo just embellishing for clout. But here's the kicker. These myths mattered. They made the Mongols terrifying, mysterious, and unforgettable, even to people who had never actually seen one in their lives. The idea of the Mongol Empire became just as powerful as the real thing. And if you think modern conspiracy theories spread fast, just remember, the Mongols managed to become both horse-riding warlords and apocalyptic villains and mystical demigods, all without TikTok. All right, fast forward a bit. Genghis's grandsons are now running the show, and one of them, Kublai Khan, decides, you know what? Conquering everything is cool, but ruling in style, even better. So he plants himself in China, sets up shop in Beijing, well, then it was called Dadu, and builds a court so lavish it made European kings look like broke college students sharing a studio apartment. Picture it. Endless banquets with golden plates, walls draped in silk, and fireworks lighting up the night sky. Marco Polo swore Kublai had a summer palace at Xanadu that was basically an ancient Las Vegas resort, gardens, fountains, even exotic animals strolling the grounds. Did Polo exaggerate? Probably. But still, the Mongols had officially gone from yurt life to penthouse suite. But here's the plot twist. Kublai wasn't just cosplaying as a Chinese emperor. He was trying to fuse two worlds. Steppe traditions mixed with Confucian rituals, Buddhist monks debated with Muslim scholars in his court, and merchants from Venice to Baghdad set up shop in the markets. If medieval China was a smartphone, Kublai basically turned on international roaming. And yet, he was still a Mongol at heart. Legend says he sometimes ditched the fancy robes, threw on his old riding gear, and reminded his officials he could still shoot an arrow from horseback better than any of them. Imagine your CEO suddenly showing up to the boardroom in ripped jeans and demolishing everyone in Mario Kart. Same energy. Of course, it wasn't all glitz and harmony. Kublai's attempts to blend cultures sometimes backfired. Chinese elites weren't thrilled about being ruled by barbarians, while some Mongols grumbled that they'd traded the open steppe for stuffy palace politics. Oh, and let's not forget those disastrous invasions of Japan where typhoons, later called kamikaze or divine winds, wrecked his fleets not once but twice. Even the most powerful ruler in the world couldn't beat bad weather. But Kublai's court left a mark. The food, the trade, the architecture, the mixing of East and West. This was globalization before globalization. You could argue that the Mongol-Chinese Empire under Kublai was the first time the world felt connected. And yet, for all his grandeur, his empire would also crack apart under the weight of its size. Spoiler alert, even the best-run fusion restaurants eventually get too many bad Yelp reviews. All right, you've survived Kublai's lavish banquets. Congrats. But now, things are about to get way, way less appetizing. Because while the Mongols were busy connecting the world through the Silk Road, they accidentally delivered something a little worse than silk, spices, or porcelain. Ever heard of the Black Death? Yeah, that charming little plague that wiped out somewhere between a third and half of Europe as population in the 14th century? You can thank the Mongol Empire's global networking skills for that one. Here's how it went down. Imagine caravans rolling across the steppe, filled with traders, envoys, soldiers, and their animals. Now add fleas hitching rides on rats hiding in grain sacks. Congratulations! You've just created the medieval version of FedEx overnight shipping for bubonic plague. One of the most infamous moments? The Siege of Kaffa in 1346. Mongol forces besieged this Black Sea port, but their camp got hit with plague. And the Mongols, being the innovative warlords they were, decided, well, if we're suffering, so will you. They allegedly catapulted plague-ridden corpses over the city walls. Yes, medieval biological warfare. Forget nukes. Try lobbing a few rotting bodies at your enemies. From there, ships carried the disease into Europe. Picture dock workers unloading goods in Genoa, Venice, or Marseille. And also unloading fleas of doom. The Mongols didn't plan for this, of course, but their empire's interconnectedness made sure the plague traveled faster than gossip on TikTok. Now, here's the ironic twist. The same empire that made the world feel smaller, more connected, more prosperous, also opened the door to one of history's deadliest pandemics. Talk about a two-for-one deal nobody asked for. And yet, the Black Death itself became a weird part of the Mongol legacy. Because when Europe eventually recovered, it entered the Renaissance, partly fueled by the very trade and cultural exchanges the Mongols had jump-started. So in a very dark, twisted way, the Mongol highways of empire carried both death and rebirth. So next time you're scrolling online and complaining about a slow Wi-Fi connection, remember, the first global network worked perfectly until it delivered a pandemic. All right, picture this. Genghis Khan dies in 1227, and suddenly his empire, the biggest land empire in history, is like a giant pie fresh out of the oven, and everyone in the family wants the biggest slice. Now, if you've ever tried splitting an inheritance with your siblings, you know how this goes. One wants grandma's jewelry, another wants the house, and someone's already Googling how to contest a will. The Mongols? They just did it with entire continents. Genghis set things up so his sons would each rule parts of the empire, but still respect a great Khan at the top. Nice idea, right? Except, yeah, human greed, ambition, and bruised egos don't play nice. Soon you've got brothers, cousins, uncles, and nephews stabbing each other, sometimes literally, for the throne. Take Ogedei Khan, Genghis's chosen successor. He ruled pretty effectively, but when he died, boom, succession crisis. One branch of the family wanted their guy, another branch wanted theirs, and suddenly the empire's holding more emergency family meetings than a reality TV show. The result? The once united Mongol Empire split into 4 giant khanates. The Golden Horde in Russia. Imagine Mongols collecting taxes from frost-bitten princes. The Ilkhanate in Persia, where Mongols adopted Persian court life but still occasionally smashed things. The Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, lots of steppe politics and endless drama. and the Yuan dynasty in China, Kublai's flashy project. It's like the world's worst group project. Everyone starts off on the same page, then one guy goes rogue, another quits, and suddenly nobody's talking to each other. And here's the kicker. Even though they shared the same bloodline, the Khanates often fought each other more viciously than they fought outsiders. Imagine your cousin showing up at Thanksgiving, and instead of awkward small talk, he brings an army of 30,000 horsemen to burn your city down. Classic Mongol holiday vibes. So, while Genghis dreamed of eternal unity, his descendants gave us one of history's greatest lessons. Conquering the world is easier than sharing it. Okay, confession time. How long can you survive without Wi-Fi? Be honest, 10 minutes, maybe an hour if you're strong. Now imagine you were a Mongol general in the 1200s trying to control an empire that stretches from Korea to Hungary. That's half the known world, and you can't exactly send a quick Slack message to your troops. So what do the Mongols do? They invent one of the fastest communication networks in history, the YAM system. Think of it like a medieval FedEx crossed with Uber Eats, but for orders, intelligence reports, and sometimes spies. Here's how it worked. Every 25-30 miles along the empire's roads, the Mongols built relay stations stocked with fresh horses, food, and grooms. Riders carrying messages would gallop full speed to a station, switch horses, and keep going. A message could travel hundreds of miles in just a couple of days. Marco Polo even wrote about it, wide-eyed like a tourist who just discovered free Wi-Fi in the middle of nowhere. He claimed there were 10,000 relay stations and more than 200,000 horses dedicated just to communication. Imagine that, 200,000 horses all working as medieval modems. And it wasn't just for military orders. The YAM also carried tax records, census data, and intelligence. Basically, if you were living under Mongol rule, Big Brother knew exactly how many goats you owned. Creepy? Yes. Efficient? Absolutely. Now compare this to Europe at the same time. Over there, a king might send a messenger on horseback and hope he didn't get drunk, robbed, or eaten by wolves along the way. Meanwhile, the Mongols are running an empire-wide 13th century version of Amazon Prime, one-day delivery, horseback edition. Here I ask the irony. The same guys famous for burning cities to the ground also kept one of the world's first global information superhighways running smoother than some modern postal systems. Yes, I'm looking at you, waiting 3 weeks for a package. So, next time your internet lags, just remember, Genghis Khan would have had your message halfway across Asia before you even finish buffering that YouTube video. All right, you've imagined the glory, feasts, horses, conquests, but let's get real for a second. Life on the steppe was brutal. You wake up in a yurt to a wind that could cut through steel, your blanket damp from condensation, and the smell of horses, lots of horses, mixed with smoke from last night's fire. Breakfast? Probably dried meat or fermented mare's milk, unless you're lucky enough to find fresh milk from a yak or cow. Spoiler, you probably aren't. Every day you ride. All day. 50 miles in the morning, 30 in the afternoon, and maybe another 10 after lunch. Your legs ache, your hands blister from rains, and your eyes sting from dust whipping across the plains. And if a storm hits, you learn to love mud in ways you never thought possible. Hygiene? Ha. You're lucky if you get a basin of water. The Mongols were nomads. They didn't sit around bathing in rivers all day. Sometimes the only thing standing between you and infection is your horse's sweat and sheer stubbornness. But life wasn't just suffering. There were games to play while traveling, wrestling, horse racing, and archery contests. Young warriors learned to compete, bond, and prove their skills, often while joking, teasing, and sometimes arguing over who had the stinkiest horse. Yes, humor survived even in the harshest conditions. And then there were the nights. The wind whistles through the steppe, wolves howl in the distance, and you can hear the faint clatter of another tribe's horses on the horizon. Sometimes you sit by the fire sipping warm milk and think about the vast empire you serve. Other times, you just try not to freeze, starve, or get trampled. This was everyday life for the Mongols, a mix of freedom and terror, laughter and survival, luxury and filth. And somehow, they made it work for centuries. It is a reminder that the people behind history's massive conquests weren't invincible superhumans. They were humans who endured, adapted, and thrived in a world that would crush most of us in a week. So next time you complain about your morning commute, just imagine riding 50 miles before breakfast in freezing dust, armed with only a bow, a horse, and a hope that your yurt hasn't blown away. So, you think the Mongols were only about arrows, horses, and skull pyramids? Think again. Their empire stretched across Eurasia, connecting people, ideas, and innovations in ways that changed the world forever. Take technology, for instance. The Mongols were quick learners. They borrowed Chinese siege engines to conquer walled cities, used Persian architects to build fortifications, and even experimented with early gunpowder weapons. It's like going from a bow and arrow video game straight into Call of Duty, Medieval Edition. Then there's writing and record keeping. The Mongols adopted the Uyghur script to write down orders, laws, and treaties, creating one of the earliest forms of standardized administration across a huge empire. They kept detailed census records, tax rolls, and postal logs, basically running the 13th century version of Excel across millions of square miles. And culture? Their empire was a melting pot. Merchants, scholars, and artists traveled freely along the Mongol highways. Persian miniatures inspired Chinese painters. Arabic astronomy informed Mongol engineers. Even European travelers like Marco Polo absorbed ideas that would later ripple back to the West. The Mongols created something like a medieval LinkedIn, connecting talent across continents. Food, too, got a glow up. Spices, noodles, dairy techniques, and preserved foods traveled along their trade routes, influencing cuisines from China to Persia to Eastern Europe. Basically, without the Mongols, your ramen, your kebab, and your chai latte might look very different. Even music and storytelling flourished. The Mongols preserved oral epics, songs, and legends that continue to shape Central Asian culture today. They turned their history into narrative, sometimes brutal, sometimes beautiful, always unforgettable. So yes, while the Mongols conquered cities and empires, they also built bridges between worlds. They weren't just destroyers, they were facilitators of ideas, art, and culture. The empire may have splintered, but its fingerprints are everywhere, in our maps, our kitchens, our art, and even the stories we still tell. All right, forget swords, horses, and conquests for a second. Let us talk about the Mongols' quirks, the kind of stuff that would make a modern person say, "Wait, what?" First up, blood as breakfast. Yes, we've mentioned fermented mare's milk before, but some Mongol warriors literally drank blood straight from a horse if they were low on energy. No filter, no pasteurization, just pure iron-rich stamina juice. Imagine opening the fridge and seeing a carton of horse blood labeled high-protein smoothie. Then there's wrestling as diplomacy. You think modern politicians have weird traditions? Mongols solved disputes with wrestling matches. Land dispute? Wrestle. Who gets the better horse? Wrestle. Someone insulted your mother-in-law? Yep, wrestling. No paperwork, just brute strength, strategy, and sometimes dramatic flair. And the yurts themselves, portable homes that were smarter than most medieval castles. They could be assembled in hours, insulated against freezing winds, and rotated with the sun. Plus, the circular design meant everyone shared the fire and kept warm together. It is like living in a perfectly engineered tent that is also Instagram-worthy if Instagram existed in the 13th century. Here is another oddity. The way Mongols used arrows in war wasn't just for shooting things. They sometimes tied messages, gifts, or even small explosive devices to arrows. A missile that's part delivery system, part terror tactic? Yep. That's the Mongol version of multitasking. And let's not forget their sense of humor. Mongols could sack a city one day, then prank each other mercilessly the next. They joked about whose horse smelled worst, whose yurt leaked the most, or who had the ugliest hat. The world's most fearsome warriors also had a surprisingly playful streak. So when you think of the Mongols, remember, they weren't just destroyers of empires. They were inventive, eccentric, and in their own way, absurdly human. Blood smoothies, wrestling politics, mobile castles, and creative arrows. Honestly, it's a wonder the world survived them. So, here we are, after horses, arrows, feasts, spies, plague, and blood smoothies, and you might be asking yourself, why should I care about a bunch of nomads from 800 years ago? Here's the truth. The Mongols didn't just conquer land, they connected worlds. They built roads, postal systems, and trade networks that let ideas, goods, and even diseases travel faster than anyone thought possible. They were the original globalizers, creating an early network that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. Without them, maps, trade routes, cuisines, and even stories would look very different today. They also remind us that history isn't black and white. Yes, they were brutal, ruthless conquerors, but they were also innovators, jokesters, and bridge builders between cultures. They drank blood, yes, but they also created laws, postal systems, and artistic traditions that lasted centuries. They could destroy a city one day and host a feast the next. Contrast that with our modern world. Sometimes it feels like the more powerful you are, the less human you can be. The Mongols were powerful and unapologetically human. And here's the most important takeaway. The Mongol Empire shows how interconnected humanity has always been. Trade, culture, technology, even disease, they traveled faster than borders. The past isn't a dusty story, it's a living lesson. Look around you. Your food, your gadgets, even the roads you drive on, they're shaped in part by these horse-riding nomads. So, as you finish watching this, maybe take a moment. Imagine the wind across the steppe, the sound of hooves, the smell of fire and roasted meat, the chaos and laughter of a camp where the largest empire the world had ever seen came alive. That world was terrifying, messy, beautiful, and it shaped ours more than most people realize. And hey, if you learned something wild, surprising, or even just kind of gross, hit that like button. Comment below which Mongol story blew your mind the most. And remember, history isn't just about kings and battles. It's about people, stories, and the connections that stretch across time and space. Dim the lights, imagine the steppe, and let the Mongols ride across your imagination for a little while longer. Imagine this. The wind whipping across the endless steppe, dust rising from thousands of hooves. You're there in the middle of it, feeling every bump, every jolt, every heartbeat of the empire. The sun is low, casting gold and blood-red shadows over yurts, fires, and banners snapping in the wind. Now, flash to the cities they conquered. Walls crumble, archers release volleys of arrows, and terrified citizens scatter. Then, cut. Celebrations in a Mongol camp. Laughter, song, roasted meat, fermented mare's milk steaming in bowls. You see the warriors wrestle, joke, and ride off into the horizon, a blur of motion and dust. Then, the empire stretches farther than the eye can see, a network of relay stations, messengers galloping with letters tied to their bows, trade caravans loaded with silk, spices, and ideas. You feel the pulse of information moving faster than armies, and somewhere, far away, ships carry goods, knowledge, and the unseen plague across oceans, connecting continents in ways even the Mongols couldn't fully control. Next, pause on the quirks. A warrior sipping horse blood, a child learning archery, a grand feast with jokes, music, and dancing. Life on the steppe wasn't just war. It was survival, creativity, community, and chaos all at once. Finally, zoom out. The empire splinters into khanates. Cousins, uncles, and nephews squabble over territory. Some regions flourish with trade, art, and knowledge. Others descend into rebellion and chaos. Yet the Mongols' mark remains. Roads, trade routes, legal codes, and cultural bridges that shape the modern world. And in the end, all that remains is the story. The wind across the steppe, the echo of hooves, the taste of roasted meat, the songs and legends, and the reminder that even the most fearsome conquerors were human. Terrifying, brilliant, strange, absurdly alive, and unforgettable. So dim the lights, lean back, and imagine the Mongols riding across history itself, connecting, conquering, creating. Because that's what empires do. They disappear as political entities, but their stories, their ideas, and their legacies, those last forever. So here's the deal. The Mongols didn't just ride across the steppe. They rode into history. They conquered, connected, innovated, and occasionally drank horse blood for breakfast. They burned cities and built roads. They terrified emperors and inspired poets. They were messy, brilliant, terrifying, and oddly human all at once. And the craziest part? You still feel their influence today. Trade routes you walk down, noodles you slurp, stories you read, even ideas that cross continents in seconds. Some of that traces back to them. The empire is gone, but the echoes of hooves, the taste of fermented milk, and the thrill of that endless horizon, they're still there. So next time you complain about slow Wi-Fi, think about the YAM system, medieval FedEx on horseback that made Europe look lazy. Next time you enjoy spaghetti, thank a Mongol caravan. And if you're feeling ambitious, maybe channel a little of that steppe fearlessness in your own life. Bold, unpredictable, and unafraid to leave your mark. If this Mongol ride blew your mind, go ahead, hit that like button, subscribe for more historical chaos, and comment below with the weirdest fact you just learned. Seriously, I want to know which story made you go, wait, what? Remember, history isn't just about dates and battles. It's about people, ideas, weird customs, and connections that stretch across time and space. And the Mongols? They're the ultimate reminder that sometimes the wildest, bloodiest, strangest stories leave the deepest mark. Ride on, fellow historians. The steppe waits for no one. Imagine this. The wind whipping across the endless steppe, dust rising from thousands of hooves. You're there in the middle of it, feeling every bump, every jolt, every heartbeat of the empire. The sun is low, casting gold and blood-red shadows over yurts, fires, and banners snapping in the wind. Now, flash to the cities they conquered. Walls crumble, archers release volleys of arrows, and terrified citizens scatter. Then, cut. Celebrations in a Mongol camp. Laughter, song, roasted meat, fermented mare's milk steaming in bowls. You see the warriors wrestle, joke, and ride off into the horizon, a blur of motion and dust. Then, the empire stretches farther than the eye can see, a network of relay stations, messengers galloping with letters tied to their bows, trade caravans loaded with silk, spices, and ideas. You feel the pulse of information moving faster than armies, and somewhere, far away, ships carry goods, knowledge, and the unseen plague across oceans, connecting continents in ways even the Mongols couldn't fully control. Next, pause on the quirks. A warrior sipping horse blood, a child learning archery, a grand feast with jokes, music, and dancing. Life on the steppe wasn't just war. It was survival, creativity, community, and chaos all at once. Finally, zoom out. The empire splinters into khanates. Cousins, uncles, and nephews squabble over territory. Some regions flourish with trade, art, and knowledge. Others descend into rebellion and chaos. Yet the Mongols' mark remains. Roads, trade routes, legal codes, and cultural bridges that shape the modern world. And in the end, all that remains is the story. The wind across the steppe, the echo of hooves, the taste of roasted meat, the songs and legends, and the reminder that even the most fearsome conquerors were human. Terrifying, brilliant, strange, absurdly alive, and unforgettable. So dim the lights, lean back, and imagine the Mongols riding across history itself, connecting, conquering, creating. Because that's what empires do. They disappear as political entities, but their stories, their ideas, and their legacies, those last forever. So here's the deal. The Mongols didn't just ride across the steppe. They rode into history. They conquered, connected, innovated, and occasionally drank horse blood for breakfast. They burned cities and built roads. They terrified emperors and inspired poets. They were messy, brilliant, terrifying, and oddly human all at once. And the craziest part? You still feel their influence today. Trade routes you walk down, noodles you slurp, stories you read, even ideas that cross continents in seconds. Some of that traces back to them. The empire is gone, but the echoes of hooves, the taste of fermented milk, and the thrill of that endless horizon, they're still there. So next time you complain about slow Wi-Fi, think about the YAM system, medieval FedEx on horseback that made Europe look lazy. Next time you enjoy spaghetti, thank a Mongol caravan. And if you're feeling ambitious, maybe channel a little of that steppe fearlessness in your own life. Bold, unpredictable, and unafraid to leave your mark. If this Mongol ride blew your mind, go ahead, hit that like button, subscribe for more historical chaos, and comment below with the weirdest fact you just learned. Seriously, I want to know which story made you go, wait, what? Remember, history isn't just about dates and battles. It's about people, ideas, weird customs, and connections that stretch across time and space. And the Mongols? They're the ultimate reminder that sometimes the wildest, bloodiest, strangest stories leave the deepest mark. Ride on, fellow historians. The steppe waits for no one.